all very welcome to our webinar on the best use of fertilizer and slurry this spring. And you're all very welcome along. There's a good crowd here. I'm going to kick off fairly promptly, just introduce the speakers. First of all, first speaker will be Austin. Austin is a dry stock advisor in Dungarvan, and Austin will go through the scenario for dry stock farms. Then we have Liam Dunphy from Gouldings, who will talk about fertilizer from an industry point of view. And then we have Owen Power as a dairy advisor in Dungarvan, will talk about fertilizer usage from a dairy point of view. We will have questions and answers then at that stage, and then we welcome along Stephen Fitzgerald, who is a signpost future farm from Oglish, and thanks to Stephen for taking the time to join us this evening. He'll give his experience of what he's going to do this spring, and Shane McCarthy, his advisor, will present with him. So just to get it kicked off, and sorry, before I get kicked off, just to let you know that there's a questions and answers button at the end. So any questions and answers you have, please put them into the Q&A section. Ruth Fennell is with me here, and she will go through the questions as the session goes on. So the more questions we have and the more interactive we can make this, all the better. So first of all, we're going to kick off with Austin, who will talk about fertilizer from a dry stock point of view.
Okay, good evening and welcome everyone. And thank you for joining us tonight. I know it's starting to be a busy time in terms of cows starting to calve down and so forth. So we appreciate having you on board tonight. Okay, so look lads, I'll maybe just start off. Look, the message tonight really from the point of view of a beef scenario before we pass on to Liam there is, I suppose, to recover as much nitrogen as we can this year from what slurry we have in the tanks that we've got filled up over the winter, and to manage what fertilizer we can throughout the year based on soil samples that we've taken from the farm. Now, at the moment, there's a 10-day turnaround if we take soil samples through maybe the likes of the FBAs or your local labs, which is quite a quick turnaround. So we'd encourage plenty of people to take those samples now as early as possible, and at least then we'll be able to target those soils that actually need the NPs and Ks as early as possible, and remove the surplus NPs and Ks, or especially the Ps and Ks on the ground that doesn't particularly need it or has a high index. It allows us just to identify and target specifically, and then at least reduce the cost to us, especially on the farm over the year. Liming has been a huge, I suppose, push from us this year in terms of trying to get as much lime as we can out on farms. That lime has a 5-to-1 return. So for every €1 spent on lime, it's a €5 return in terms of the nitrogen release that the lime gives to the ground. And I suppose from the point of view of there's 2 or 3 points that we have quite often with lime, in the fact that, look, it can be spread at any time of the year, but primarily on the drier soils and at the back end of the year. And I suppose the other point being is that we try and avoid it going onto ground that you're making silage on. So primarily silage ground would live till the back end of the year, and you can go with grazing ground at any time, but don't mix it with ground that has just got slurry. So from a slurry point of view then as well, I suppose the other point we'd like to make is that we've huge volumes generated over the winter and early spring on farms, and we'll be under pressure to empty a few tanks or to lower the tanks in the next week or so when that window or date opens. But what we would be encouraging you to do really is to try and just, if the tanks are filling, to maybe just alleviate the problem slightly by lowering it maybe only that 1.5 to 2 feet, and then hold that slurry until it's the right time when growth is actually actively going. And that's primarily on beef farms from mid-March onwards. And in the next couple of slides there, I just have maybe 1 or 2 guidelines for what fertilizer and slurry should be going out on beef farms, depending on your stocking rate. But of course now, given the fact that fertilizer has become so expensive, and the reasons why Liam will be going through with you next, it just puts an added value onto slurry that we have in our tanks this year. And so much so, any of the piggeries, for a change, instead of looking for people to take it, they didn't have enough of it, such was the demand. So again, we're encouraging the use of the low emission slurry spreading, and Stephen Fitzgerald, who's on the call there, he'll be going through the benefits that he has seen from the use of it and getting that higher nitrogen return, and also the benefit of actually going into probably higher grass covers and being able to graze it a lot sooner than what you would with the splash plate. Applying in the spring, of course, obviously to reduce the amount of nitrogen loss is the key one. And I suppose whatever surplus slurry we have left over, then we'd be trying to target it on the silage ground that we have, because that has the biggest demand for NP and K on the farm. And to wrap it all up then, I suppose, in terms of like, how do we put it together? Really, it's only put together in terms of a fertilizer plan. Many of you will have them from the point of view of being in derogation, or been in with us in the office with the last number of months, having taken soil samples. But it's never been more important to associate what soil samples you'll have freshly taken and match the amount of slurry and fertilizer that you'll be putting out this spring. So really, they're the kind of the four main points. And I suppose if I was to summarize tonight's maybe presentation, it would be in two messages. It's that we're trying to recover as much nitrogen as we can within the farm this year ourselves, and slurry has to be spread at the right rate, at the right time, and in the right place. So just moving on then to the whole beef scenario, the 3Fs this year are hitting us hard: fertilizer, feed, and fuel. Fertilizer has the largest impact in terms of its cost on a farm, and last year's cost of fertilizer was about 5,500 on the average beef farm. If we were to correlate that price through to this year, the same fertilizer would cost nearly 6,000 more at 11,500, which, you know, beef farms can take that impact and that kind of cost, especially when you look at beef price. Really, in terms of the price we're getting in the marts or in the factories, are only up about 15% on this time last year. However, our costs above are renting up from anything from 10 to 100%. So how do we try and navigate that big hurdle this year? I suppose the one thing I did mention was that on the average beef farm, which is about 38 hectares and has 70 full livestock units, we have about €3,500 worth of slurry available to us in terms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Like, that's a huge value to have there, and it's about €100 a hectare available in a nitrogen or fertilizer form that we have available to kickstart our year, which is a powerful punch to start with straight away. And that's why we're encouraging the use of, you know, low emission slurry spread and get that extra bit of slurry out of it, or nitrogen out of it. And Owen will be going through with you next in one of his slides, the impact and the importance of knowing what is the value of the slurry on your farm. And we've seen a huge variation in the tests that we've done on those farms. The other big factor this year that'll have to come and play with us, I suppose, is the weather. And that will have to work very well with us this year, and the fact that, you know, trying to avoid heavy periods of, you know, drought again, like 2018, which was an exceptional kind of a year. But really, the weather, in order to, I suppose, help the beef scenario this year, it would have to be more of a normal kind of a spring. But look, that'll have to play out. We've no control over that. But we would hope, given the fact that there's good grass growth covers over there with the last kind of 2 weeks, you've seen good covers of grass. There's never been as much grass on farms with the last 2 weeks. When we'll get to graze, that will be the big question going forward. So from a beef point of view, if there's one message I'd like to you could take home tonight, and it's probably across the board, not only in the beef sector, but in the dairying, tillage and sheep too, is that the fertilizer has to be spread at the right time, the right rate, and in the right place. And primarily, we will only know that based on the fact that if we have soil samples taking and matching it to those. And I suppose the right time really it's about hitting the right time when that fertilizer will have its biggest impact. And really for beef farmers, that is from mid-March onwards, when you have a greater efficiency from every bag that you do put out. The right rate, I'll be going through with those which are there next. And of course, the right rate and the right place, I suppose, is based on the soil samples that you'd have taken. So just to give you an impact of fertilizer prices and where they've gone with the last, you could say 8 to 10 months, you can see there in last April, can was at $235 a ton, and now you're looking north of €700. And likewise with urea, it would have been available there for around the 370, and that's heading for €900 now. Again, the compounds there's been a huge swing. So really, nitrogen has doubled in value, and your P's and K's really have swung between 30 to 50% of an increase. which is absolutely phenomenal in terms of the prices people have to pay. I suppose the biggest impact in September was the fact the leads that were receding saw the big impact in the compounds, and that had a big part to play when the fertilizer price was €200 a ton cheaper a couple of months before that. So the importance of fertilizer this coming year and prices, it'll be very interesting to hear what Liam will be talking about and its availability when he's coming up next. So we have two scenarios here just to run with. We have scenario one where we have, we'll say, the average dry stock farmer there stocked at 1.5 livestock units. And what are we saying to him? So on the left-hand side, we're saying here that roughly, look, about 90 units of nitrogen to the acre should do him throughout the year. But really about 65 of that should be spread by May. And how can that actually be spread? So what we're encouraging him there is to go out there with half a bag of protected urea, which would be 23 units there in early March, or the equivalent of 2,500 gallons of slurry. If we can get that out at the right time, you can see the huge difference that it can have, especially slurry. If it's put out at the right time, it sets up the farm for the year. Heading into April then, when more of a demand comes on in terms of the farm and grass growth and the requirement all stock are out, we're encouraging there a bag of 18,612 or 2,000 gallons of slurry, depending on what you'd have gone out with the previous March and your stocking rate. And pushing then into May, when you have paddocks closed off for silage, the grazing platform is getting quite tight. So what we'd be encouraging there is going out with half a bag of protected urea on the grazing platform at that stage. So you'll be hitting about 64 units of nitrogen there by May, and that should match your growth requirements based on your stocking rate for the year. So that's if you're at 1.5 livestock units to the hectare, 65 units. And how about then if you're that bit heavier stocked, what are the options? So what we're encouraging then, if you are up on maybe 2 livestock units to the hectare, we'd be looking at, on the left-hand column here, a total nitrogen use of about 130 units should do you, 8 units of P and 12 units of K. So again, by early to mid-March there, when growth is starting to just kick off, and you'll get a better bang for your buck in terms of the efficiency return for both urea or the slurry that's going out. We're encouraging there 23 units of nitrogen. And the advice is coming into April, coming out then with the likes of a bag of 18,612, a bag and a half, or 2,000 gallons of slurry. So you'll be hitting there the ground with, at the period of highest demand, 27 units of nitrogen, 9 units of P, and about 18 units of K. So look, you're hitting then early May then when as we're saying, the silage ground is closed off. You'd need to be going out then at that stage with a bag of protected urea, 46 units, to be hitting about 96 units kind of there by early May to mid-May when the peak grass growth season has kicked off. So that's really the two scenarios that we see playing out this year in terms of what's available to dry stock farmers. And it's probably 20 to 30 units back on what we'd have encouraged other years, but that's purely down to price and the scenario we find ourselves in now tonight. So I suppose maybe to summarize, I suppose our points would be is that all dry stock farmers this year really, it should be early to mid-March before fertilizer should be considered from an efficiency point of view. And to put a fertilizer plan in place based on the soil samples that you have. That's of absolute importance because, we primarily need to know what the ground needs, and we don't know what it needs until we've taken a soil sample. And we're saying, look, 10 to 12 days of a turnaround, you'll have it before the end of the month. And then you can make the decisions and come into us and we'll formulate a plan with you best suited to your farm and your stocking rate. Okay, Richie, that's just me, kind of just a quick summary. Okay, if you have any questions or queries, we can move on.
I go over to Liam. I've just one question came in there about lime. Is it too late to spread lime? You mentioned the importance of lime. It's the cheapest fertilizer out there. Is it too late to spread it?
No, certainly not on grazing ground. And the encourage would be, and little and often on grazing ground is encouraged, and particularly on lower covers, probably under 800 kilos of a cover. That's what's best in terms of going out. We'd be encouraging it to go out on grazing ground more so than any ground that's going to be set aside for silage. So on grazing ground, certainly we'd be encouraging going out anything from 1 ton to 2 ton on the grazing platform this year is perfectly acceptable.
Okay, perfect, Austin. We'll have more questions, and don't forget the Q&A at the end of your screens. Keep the questions coming in. I'm going straight to Liam. I think Liam has another meeting, so I'm going to go straight to Liam. And there's a question there, Liam. You're straight away. There's a question for you about the availability of protected urea. Austin has mentioned protected urea a few times, but the availability of protected urea. So I'll hand over to you, Liam. And you're very welcome.
Thanks, Richie. I might bring it up in the presentation if that's okay.
Perfect. Yeah, that's perfect.
So right, just be as brief as possible. Happy to take any questions at the end, or I'll try and address the protected urea question as we go through. So just going to run through it in 6 little sections, small little couple of slides on ourselves, the Irish fert market, to give people a flavour of the Irish fertiliser market. Compare that then to world fertiliser production. A few slides, as Austin said, on why product is scarce, a little bit on price movements at the end, and a slide on the price outlook for the spring. Please don't say that's not going to work. So a small bit on ourselves, just to give you an idea of Gouldings and our background. We operate obviously in Ireland. We have 4 plants on the island of Ireland. We're part of a group called Origin Enterprises. That's our footprint across Ireland and the UK. We've 12 plants in the UK and 1 amenity plant, we call it. Gouldings itself is 166 years in business at this stage. So hopefully we can adapt to the changes that are coming down the line and stay going for as long again. Our group operates in the green countries on the map for fertiliser. So we have Ireland, UK, Poland, Ukraine, Romania, and we actually, and it's not on this map, but we have an operation in Brazil also. So we're part of that setup, part of a greater operation is the message I'm trying to get across here. Our overall fertiliser tonnage is roughly in the region of 2.3 million tonnes. May not be that this year, but it has been that in the last few years. Just to give people an idea, I know we're all spreading fertiliser on the other side of the screen for me here, but this gives you a rough idea of where fertiliser comes into Ireland from. In the last 6 months, what I wanted to point out here is we've become very heavily dependent on this side of the map here, on the Russian area. And I'll explain why in a little while. Just before I came on, I was roughly totting up here. There are issues here with probably 90% of the countries on the map associated. The only 2 that we don't have an issue with really are Morocco and Tunisia, where phosphate comes from. Other than that, there's some form of a restriction or a cutback in any of the other countries on that slide. So that's a little bit on the background of the whole thing. To give yourselves an idea of the Irish fertiliser market, this is just in the Republic of Ireland. In the year gone out, there was 1.685 million tonnes of fertiliser sold in Ireland. This is to the co-ops and merchants. Not saying it has all been used on farm, but that was sold to co-ops and merchants. Surprisingly, it increased from the year before. That wasn't expected to happen. Obviously, in the year going out, that will be expected to fall back, probably in our own estimate, somewhere in the region of 15%, just simply due to the high prices. You can see yourselves where it has increased a bit over the last few years. Myself, I would have a theory that we should be, as a country, looking at capping the amount of N in fertiliser. We're all under pressure. At farm level, it's causing most pressure, obviously, the environmental regulations, emissions, etc. I think maybe when something like this is happening, we need to look at possibly, as an industry, just capping the level of N in our bag of nitrogen and make fertiliser that be cheaper per bag and encourage everybody to bring it back to the acre and keep it simple. Just to give you a flavour of how important January, February, March are here. You saw on the previous slide, we have 1.6 million tonnes or 1.7 million tonnes almost in the country over 12 months. By the end of March, almost 60% of that moved last year. That's gone out, and that's Department of Agriculture official stats. That's gone from the fertiliser wholesalers out to the trade and out to farm. I'm guessing this year, and it's very difficult to know, but I'm just trying to throw a figure on it, that this year that could fall by 15% over the first 3 months. And we're at roughly then around 800,000 tonnes required by the end of March. I can't accurately say how much is in the country today. I know how much we have ourselves. I'm trying then to, we'll say, scale that up using our market share and trying to assume every other supplier has bought at least at the same level as ourselves. And if that were the case, there are somewhere around 420,000 of the 800,000 in the country. There or thereabouts. We've work to do to get to 800, huge work. And what we need to bear in mind is main markets in Europe are only going to kick in for demand in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So there's a tough job on hand here to get all the fertilizer that's required. It may be less than that, but equally then what we need to add to that is the stock that's required at the end of March on the ground to service the April market, which is the big market. So for me, one take-home message as a farmer out of this would be that I don't think you're going to see any mad issues over the next 6 to 8 weeks on fertilizer, would by my own thinking. But, and Austin alluded there to the prime time, I suppose, for spreading fertilizer for a beef farmer. It's not going to be hugely different for any. If the tillage will kick in second half of February, the dairy farmer will kick in after the first round of slurry. To me, we're going to see the real crunch period here for availability from Paddy's Day to the middle of April. That's when it'll really, really hit home. So we have a bit to go to get to there, but if you take one message out of tonight from me, bear in mind that this will be the crunch period. I just want to scale up then to the world market to show you where we are on a world scale. So bear in mind, I said Ireland have roughly 1.6 million tons of fertilizer on average in the last 3 or 4 years. The slides here, the figures here would roughly add to 400 million tons. So that's 400 million tons of production of the products we use. There's a bit more of other products, but not a whole lot. Urea is obviously huge on a world scale. The point to make would be CAN, and I have a slide on in a second, which is obviously very popular in Ireland. It's our biggest product. CAN is not very big on a world scale. It's only less than 10% of the amount of urea that's there. The phosphate is somewhere around 67 million tons, potash 70 million tons. AN is a popular nitrogen product, but not allowed to be used in Ireland, going back to the days of paramilitary activity, I suppose is the way you'd say it. Give you a flavour of the CAN, and I just want to put up this for one reason. If you just take the bottom right figure, if you're able to see it anyway clearly, it's 15.6 million tons of CAN in the world. And if you just took those countries there, and these figures here on the right, in excess of 90% of the CAN in the world is produced in Europe. That's why you're hearing all this talk about gas, etc., and we can come on to that in a few minutes because it's very topical and there's no point in trying to avoid the subject. So just to move on to availability, on Austin's point. I've tried to rank these in order of which I think is most important. And why are we where we are? To me, the prime reason is the Chinese. Number 2, Russia. Number 3, believe it or not, is Turkey, and nobody talks about it. I would only put gas at number 4. And then world demand, and I have an extra slide on it, but world demand is increasing at about 1.5–2% per year. And production is not keeping pace with demand as such. So just one slide on each of the reasons. China, and now bear in mind, not 1 ton of fertilizer comes into Ireland from China. It's actually irrelevant from an actual supply point of view, but it's the effect it's having on the world market. So I know this is a poorly, the text is not good on the slide, but it's scaled up here to roughly the top peak bar of the graph was back in about 2015 when China produced roughly 80 million tons. Now, since then, it has been slipping away, mainly due to environmental reasons and the fact that they produce from coal and they've had to clean up their act. Out to the right here, the last bar on the graph is 2021, not the full year, roughly to the middle of October when the ban came into place. And at that point in time, they had somewhere close to 40 million tons of fertilizer produced, with 25 million tons of that having been exported in the first 9 months of the year. So that gives you an idea of how important these guys are. They've now put a ban in place until June 2022. The big knock-on effect of this, you know, for anyone that's probably a lot of guys following this on social media, etc., and on the internet, there's an awful lot to talk about, obviously. You hear a lot about India and urea. So India had these famous Indian tenders once a month, once every 6 weeks. That sets the benchmark for urea pricing. Their main supplier has been China, and they're just gone at the moment. So India now has to go to the Baltic states or Egypt or Algeria or wherever from my earlier map, and they're mopping up the urea that us and the UK and France and Spain and Germany should be getting. That's why urea is a bit tight, and that's why the price has increased. India are taking those tons, and the government buy it to subsidize their farmers to use it, etc. These nations all want to become food secure, and that's why the pressure is coming on at the moment. Russia has become hugely important to Ireland over the last 6 months. So if you go back to the middle of September, gas price rose to a level where a lot of production closed down. First people to close were the UK. They went mad buying Russian fertilizer because it was their only source. All the Europeans effectively went off the market. No pricing, production curtailed or production shut down. There was only one show in town as such, and that was the Russians. They had a huge outflow of fertilizer, and it just obviously triggered alarm bells, whereby Putin has decided to put in an export quota, which kicked in on the 1st of December, and it's now in place until the end of May. Nitrogen products are the most affected. Just to give you one example, ammonium nitrate we use CAN, which is calcium ammonium nitrate. Ammonium nitrate is the main source of nitrogen across Europe. There will be 875,000 tons less ammonium nitrate coming out of Russia over the next number of months. And that has to be replaced by something, likely to be CAN across Europe. So you see Putin's theory here. He wants to be able to keep food security in his country. He has advocated with an unofficial policy of trebling fertilizer use, turning fallow ground into productive ground. The quotas are there. The exporters are afraid to export almost. They must serve the domestic market first. And the best part of all this, the farmer pays about half of what the Irish farmer is paying for fertilizer. Gas is much cheaper, and the price is actually capped in the country to encourage its use. This is the way these guys are thinking. The effect they're able to have on the world is huge. Turkey, not a known fertilizer nation, I suppose, but I just tried to put in a little table here to give people an idea of how important it is. And surprising enough, when we dug into the research on this over the last few months, surprising you wouldn't have thought this. So they've put in what they call an export license. They didn't call it a ban, but the licenses are not being issued. Therefore, the boats are not allowed to be exported. Ireland is suffering from this at the moment. There were a few boats lined up for Ireland, probably in the region of 20 or 30,000 tons. They will not come. It's effectively the contracts have been declared null and void over the last number of weeks. Main reason they're doing this is they're a urea nation, but they're finding it difficult to get to the urea due to the Chinese and the Indians. And just a little table at the bottom will give you an idea. They exported 500,000 tons of cane in 2020. Almost 20% of that came to Ireland, which is surprising. Ireland sells roughly 650,000 ton of cane, or cane with sulfur. So you can see how important it is to this country here. And they're gone there. So from my earlier map, Greece, Ukraine, Turkey, they're just gone off the market completely. Northern European countries that I showed on the map, they're in the game, to be fair, but maybe at a lower level than what we're used to in the past. The UK have no national fertilizer supplies at the moment. CF closed down in September. They came back online with a government subsidy, and they've not actually been in the game in all of December or January so far. So there's gaps to be filled all over the continent. The most topical aspect of fertilizer in the last 10 days, I suppose, has been European gas. Just to throw up the graph and try and explain around it, okay? The one thing I would say is we're going to have huge volatility on prices. You could go on any day, today, tomorrow, yesterday, and find gas up or down 10 or 15%. But the big thing is, you're finding it, and I don't know whether you can see the screen that closely, but my mouse is out to the right. You can find it that the volatility is now at a new level. So if you go back, say, just go back 12 months and to throw a few figures on it. Back here at the left-hand side of the graph, which was January 21, gas was trading at €18 per megawatt hour. We got here to mid-September, roughly 16th of September, gas reached €62 per megawatt hour. That was when the plant closure started happening. Once it went north of 60, the plants closed across Europe. They became non-profitable. It was a loss-making exercise at that stage. We moved on then where gas found a new level up in the 90s, we'll call it, just roughly anywhere from 85 to 95. But prices moved on. The cost to us moved on. The cost to yourself moved on. So these guys were working on more expensive gas to make CAN, but they were getting enough for the product to keep them profitable. And again, start offering product maybe come November, December. So the most recent headline spoke about a fall in gas by 50% there or thereabouts in the journal last week. Yes, gas did spike up here to a level of about 185, 187. And yes, it did fall 50% from that. But, and I think I actually have it on the next slide, maybe I should have moved on. Yeah. I just did a quick exercise last week when we came back after Christmas. On the 4th of January, roughly middle of the day, gas was €97 per megawatt hour, which was the exact same as it was on the 6th of December, there or thereabouts, 1 month earlier. So in a way, the newspaper article gave a false picture. I believe if CAN had to be manufactured with gas at this peak in the graph here, we would probably be talking somewhere in the region of €1,500 a ton. So to be absolute non-runner job, to be a total non-runner for everybody. There would nobody, but we wouldn't even take the risk of buying it ourselves. So it would be a total non-runner. So bear in mind, early January is here the same as early December. Nothing really has changed over the 4 weeks. Only we're now getting into European winter, colder temperatures, probably more demand than gas. Probably a certain amount of guys, as I said, probably follow on social media here. I just snapped these off social media and you can find loads of this type of stuff. But they measure gas in Europe according to the fill level. So it's a benchmark for gas storage. Gas withdrawals in Europe are probably 1 month ahead of where they should be. We're currently at about 55% storage. That's normally end of January levels. Prices went up and came down heavily, mainly due to mild weather and shipments of gas from the US, where Europe is now outbidding Asia for those shipments, currently anyway. But all those shipments, those 24 big ships came in at the time, it's roughly the equivalent of 2 days gas. So weather and US shipments combined roughly save maybe 4, possibly 5 days gas consumption. What happens here if the US get a cold snap and Europe get a cold snap at the same time? Then the gas thing really bites again. So just to keep moving, because conscious enough of time on everybody.
And no, time is running, Liam. We're way behind now at the minute, yeah.
Just on Richie. Price movements. To give you a flavour of what raw materials are costing us today, and I tried to go back to December 20, which was maybe December 20 would be roughly the fertilizer you were buying in maybe March of 21 or February of 21. So CAN has gone up $470 since then. Urea $775, DAP $700, MOP $370. Exchange rate alone, and I haven't got into it. If you're buying a product costing $1,000, exchange rate this January versus January the year before has added the equivalent of €45 a ton to the product. And obviously freight could be anywhere in the region of 30 or 40 euro. Quick outlook for the spring. Only my own opinion. And I don't think there's anyone on this call qualified to really give a true opinion. To me, it'll be people like the Emperor of China or Putin himself that will dictate where fertilizer prices are going to be in Dungarvan or South Kilkenny come April. But while supplies remain tight and bans are in place, we're going to have issues getting product. The suppliers in Europe, they're very, very open in saying when European demand starts, they will supply the local markets. That'll be Belgium, France, Holland, Germany. They won't put it on a ship to Ireland for 60 euro a tonne if they can put it on a truck locally for 20 euro a tonne. And they're very open about saying that. They have a responsibility to their own nations. Credit an issue, won't get into it. We've discussed gas. Obviously, urea is the value product of choice for the spring, but the availability is the biggest issue. And it's probably worth looking at NPKs where soil fertility is an issue. They are actually good value. While they're crazy dear, they're still actually good value versus CAN. The gap of NPKs versus CAN is at its lowest in a long, long time. So that's it, Richie. Open to any questions or queries or criticisms or suggestions.
Perfect, Liam. I'll throw that question on urea. I just there's one question. How much less have Gouldings in stock this year than last year? Maybe
I have to give it in tons, or can I do it in percentage?
Percentage, I'd say now would be.
Roughly at the end of December, in the region of 30%.
So 30% less stock. Okay.
Our business plan was, in 3 lines, I'll give it. We set out with a business plan the 1st of October to have 80% of what we sold at the end of March last year. We budgeted to sell 80% of that tonnage. We were hoping to have 2/3 of that overall tonnage in place by the end of December. For various reasons, logistical mainly, and not able to get our hands on the product, that hasn't happened. We have failed to achieve that target. Look, I'll be honest, and there's a lot of farmers on the call, obviously. We're driving on trying to buy fertilizer. We know ourselves if we don't buy it today, we will not have it when it matters. The price is mad. I'll be the first one to admit that. But we're either going to make a decision to have it here or not have it. And we won't be thanked for not having it. And if we end up with dear fertilizer, we won't be thanked either. It's very hard to get the balance.
Okay, Ruth, is there any other questions coming through there?
I probably never addressed the protected urea, Richie, actually.
All right, the protected urea is the first question. Okay. How much less, again, bring that back, how much less protected urea is in stock this year compared to last year, the end of December? Can it be got at all?
Yes, protected urea can be got, Richie, okay? Only last week we received a shipment of urea into Cork. We have none of it bagged. We're holding tough on it. We can put all that out as protected urea if required. But I might as well be honest, and we've surveyed our customers and canvassed around, we've no orders. That's the problem. And you know, I'm not going to ask people to answer this, but are orders coming through from ground level for protected urea? Because I go as far as saying, I've had this conversation with several people before, there's roughly 100,000 tonnes of urea sold in Ireland, 45,000 tonnes of protected urea. Every tonne of that can be made as protected. Once we know that it's required as protected, we can make it all as protected. No,
I think that's very clear, Liam. If farmers want it, they can get it.
Well, yeah, but the only thing is we can't hang on to it forever. We'll need to be putting that in a bag in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
Absolutely, it's there.
Okay, no, that's very clear. Okay. I don't think there's any other questions, Ruth, for Liam. We're going to keep going. Thanks very much for that, Liam. There might be questions. I don't know, are you hanging on for a while?
I'll hang on there, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So there might be questions towards the end. So again, keep the questions coming in the Q&A section there. So at the end of your screen. So we'll hand over to Owen, who will talk about from a dairy perspective. Yeah.
Okay, you're all very welcome, and thanks, Liam, for your insight. Will help my presentation. Look, the importance of and use of slurry as a fertilizer this year is more important after hearing what Liam has says. You know, the availability of fertilizer, especially coming into the second quarter of the year. I'm just going to look at, you know, with fertilizer prices being at an all-time high, you know, there's a lot of slurry on farms, and we must use this slurry, you know, to the best we can this year, and, you know, help to replace some of the chemical fertilizer that is on farm. So I'm just going to look at fertilizer. Look, it's not a byproduct anymore. We're well aware of that. Probably the funny thing about slurry is, you know, there's large quantities of it on every farm, but the quality or the you know is highly variable between farms. It's like, you know what is the value of slurry? You know, and it's very easy to look at book values, and these are the book values that we often talk about. You know, slurry is 7% dry matter. There's somewhere between 9, 5 and 35 of NP and K, and that's how many units in a thousand gallons. So if you take a 50 kg bag, we have 9 units of N, we have 5 units of P, and we have 35 units of K in every 1,000 gallons. That's what it's equivalent to. And looking, at these are rough estimates because, as Liam has highlighted, the prices are changing. In monetary terms, the nitrogen is worth roughly €11 in that bag. The phosphorus is worth about another €9, and the K is worth €26. So the 1,000 gallons of slurry that you have in the yard could be worth €45, €46 for the 1,000 gallons. And to take that into account, if you take an average 100 cow herd and potentially, with 6 months of slurry, we say from the 1st of November to the 1st of March, that's the same as having 6 ton of 9,535 in the yard. And if you really want to put a value on it, that's worth somewhere around €5,500. So look, Austin highlighted how much slurry the dry stock men have, somewhere around 3,500. A dairyman with 100 cows could have 5,500 euros worth of slurry in their farm. Look, and I said, this is all based on book values, 7% dry matter. This is what we expect to see in slurry 9,535. But, it's like me, if Liam dropped off 10 ton of white bags in your yard with no label on it, and told you to, spread that now for your silage or to grow the grass, where do you start? How much do I spread? If there's no label on it, it's a guessing game. And this is what is in your own tanks. And I'll show you, these are book values that we often refer to, the value of slurry. And the biggest thing that has an effect on slurry is the dry matter of the slurry. So the dry matter is really, how much water versus how much dry matter is in the slurry. So if you have 2% dry matter, that means there's 98% of it water, okay? So within that 2% dry matter, there's 4 units of nitrogen in 1,000 gallons. There's approximately 2 units of phosphorus in 1,000 gallons, and there's 13 units of K in 1,000 gallons. So in today's terms, that 1,000 gallons of slurry at 2% dry matter is valued at €18. Okay, now I'm not going to go through all the figures. So just to go up to the top line, if you had 7% dry matter slurry, you could have up to 10 units of nitrogen. You could have 6 units of P and up to 36 units of K, which could have a value up to €50 in today's terms. Now, all these values of NPs and Ks will vary hugely as well, depending on the animal type, depends on whether the tank is covered, uncovered. It depends on the diet of the animal, whether it's silage, meal, beet, maize, all those things that will have a contributing factor. So there's a huge variation, I suppose, is the message I'm getting across, that can be in slurry tanks. And look, I suppose the only way to really know what have you got in your yard is to slurry test it. So get it tested, find out exactly how much NP and K you have in your tanks. And look, this gives you better decisions that you can do this spring in terms of how and where to use your slurry. And look, many of you are probably thinking, look, how do I analyze my slurry? How do I go about it? So there's 2 methods of testing slurry to see what have you actually got. The first way of doing it is to send off a sample of it to an approved laboratory. So how do you go about this? And this is, what we recommend in a health and safety way is, 1, you agitate the slurry as normal, as if you're going to spread the slurry out in the field. You back in the tractor and the slurry tanker and you fill it up. So you have a full tanker load of slurry. You get something like a half a blue barrel or some sort of a container, and you put it on the ground at the back of the slurry tanker, and you leave out some of the slurry back out again into the container. Then in a clean, dry 2 litre, I call it a milk carton, some sort of a plastic bottle, you take a 2 litre sample out of that slurry. And that is what you have to send off to the lab to get tested. Now, we did a trial in Waterford and Kilkenny, and some of you heard about this already, this time last year in terms of testing slurries, and we sent them up to FBA laboratories in Cappoquin. So when we send them off to the laboratory, what do we want back? You have to look for the dry matter percentage and also the total nutrients in kgs per ton of NP and K. Now, this will cost somewhere in the region of 75 to 100 euro per sample. But in today's prices, that's this might be only the cost of 2 bags a can. Okay, so to know what you have, that's what we recommend. There's also another method of testing your slurry, and how you go is to use these slurry hydrometers. Really, what a slurry hydrometer is, it's a glass kind of tube. You take a sample of your slurry, as in what I said above, and you put it into a jug, and you drop this glass tube into the slurry. There's kind of a bobble on the end of it with air in it and so forth, and this will rise or sink depending on the dry matter that's in the slurry. And at the surface level, then there's readings on the hydrometer, and that will tell you the dry matter of the slurry. And you can use that then to go back and look at, what are the estimated NP and K values from the standard tables that we have for slurry at different dry matters. And you can use that, and that will tell you then, how much slurry how much NP and K you have in your slurry. The only thing this is quick and fast, a hydrometer. You can purchase them. They're probably in the region of 50 or 60 euro to purchase one hydrometer. Look, and if you have number tanks across the farmyard, you can test it as often as you want to. It's only once you don't break the glass. With the approved laboratory, there's a lead-in time to that, because, as I said, dry matter is somewhere between 2 and 6% or 7% in slurries in general. But laboratories have to send off the sample to get it dried out. In other words, take all the water out of the sample. So that takes time. So if anyone is thinking of taking samples, I'd recommend that maybe working groups, so you can send in 10 or 12 samples to the laboratory at the one time. So they'll have a faster turnaround time, because they won't do anything until they have enough of samples together to run the tests. Okay, so just looking at what we did in Waterford this time last year, we took, got a number of farmers to take samples. So we have 3 different sets of samples here that was taken. So the first line here is samples that were taken in covered slatted tanks. In other words, these were tanks that had a roof over them. There was no rainwater coming into these tanks. So it was basically whatever urine and slurry is coming off the animals themselves. And, averages are nice, right? But they're very dangerous, because, there's a huge variation. And we saw this when we got these slurry samples taken. So the average of these slurries in the covered tanks was 7.2%, but that ranged from 3 up to 10. So there's a huge variation. But look, I'm not going to dwell on that. But look, the average was 6 units of nitrogen, 5 units of P, 40 units of K. And just to highlight, the K was the one that was the most variable. That ranged from somewhere between 17 and 67 units of K in every 1,000 gallons. So there's a huge variation, even though they're all covered tanks. Uncovered tanks or lagoons, or anywhere where rainwater can get access to these, had a lower dry matter for obvious reasons. There's more water getting into them. So that affects, the nutrient contents as well. So the nitrogen was 3% or 3 units. The phosphorus was 2 units, and the K was 14 units. And the same thing again, the K ranged from 6 up to 21. Some farmyards have designated, we say, dairy washing tanks. So in other words, these are just collecting yard tanks. There's no other slurries coming into them, only while the cows are milking, we say, for the hour or 2 in morning and evening. And they got them tested as well, just to see what is in a dairy washing tank. Dry matter is 2%, nitrogen was 2, phosphorus was 2, and the K was 14. So it's very similar to an uncovered slurry lagoon type tanks as well, that the dairy washings, and we're surprised with the amount of nutrients that were in those. So probably look, the key message from all this is there's huge variation across all farms. What nutrients you have in your tanks. And so, as I said, unless you get them tested, you know exactly what you have. So I'm just going to look at one example of, a fertilizer plan for this spring for a dairyman. So I'm just looking at a person that has, a farm stocked at 1 livestock unit to the acre or 2.5 livestock units to the hectare on average across the farm, I'm assuming P is at index 3 and for P and K. Okay, so this is kind of where we're looking at a farm that is following his lime and P's and K's all along, and he's fairly well set up, so he's in a good position. So I'm not going as far as Austin, where he went off out into April and May in terms of his fertilizer. I'm just looking at the next 2 months to see, what do we need, or how much NP and K do we need on the farm. So firstly, I'm just going to look at, the amount of nitrogen we need on the farm is roughly 60 units per acre, right, for February and March in total. 12 units of P and 30 units or thereabouts of K. So by applying, we say, a half bag of urea in February is going to contribute somewhere in the region of 23 units, and down as protected urea, you have been told you can get it if you look for it in the next week. So 23 units of protected urea for February. And then look, for maintenance levels, you need 12 and 30 units of K. So like 2 bags of 18, 6, 12 will do that job in March. The only proviso I put on all of this is, if you have slurry, and which many of you do and will be at it at the end of this week, slurry will be going out on farms. If you're putting out slurry at the rate of 2,500 gallons, now whether it goes out in February or goes out in March, that 2,500 gallons in effect will replace the P and K. So you will have your P and K kind of allowances spread with the 2,500 gallons of slurry. But bear in mind, with the use of low emissions spreaders and everything, there's approximately 20 units of nitrogen also in that 2,500 gallons of slurry. So we also have to take that into account and adjust our nitrogen of 60 back to the region of somewhere around 40 if you're spreading slurry as well. So that's just kind of a simple way of putting it, right? So just bear in mind you have N, P, and K in your slurry, and get it tested if you want to know exactly what you have. And just to highlight what Liam was saying, is protected urea too dear? Is urea too dear? Look, obviously everything is too dear relative to what we're paying for it over the last number of years. And this is just a simple table. Look, urea has 920 units in every ton. CAN has 550 units in every ton. And if you looked at the costs of our, somewhere around €900, 950 for protected urea, 685, 700 euro for CAN, something like that, we say. If you look at it on a per unit basis, and this is the most important thing at this stage with high prices, you have to look on products on a per unit basis. Every unit of urea is 96 cents. Every unit of protected urea is 102. So they're hovering around the €1 per unit, give or take. Okay. And obviously, look, protected urea is not any more expensive than normal urea on a per unit basis. When you compare to CAN, CAN is €1.25. So CAN is still 25% more expensive than the ureas and the protected ureas. And also, look, for obvious reasons, protected urea has other benefits from an environmental point of view and lower losses as well, such as ammonia. So Richie, that's my last slide on it.
Okay, thanks, Owen. And just so we're waiting for, is there questions? Ruth?
We just have one or two after coming in relation to slurry and stuff, and if it's okay, I might just throw those across to Owen for a quick minute. Owen, one of the questions are we wasting nutrients by adding water for agitation as is required for the trailing shoe?
We're generally not losing the P and K values. Okay, the P and K values will vary per 1,000 gallons. Okay, the funny thing about adding water to slurry is also you increasing the availability of nitrogen. So the more watery we say slurry is, the more return and the more nitrogen that is trapped by the plant and the roots and utilized by the plant. So you're getting better use out of your slurry, if you know what I mean, by having it that little bit more watery. Whereas if it's too dry, it's kind of has a tendency to sit on the top of the surface and is drying out with the wind and air, and it's volatilizing, and there's greater chance of losses.
We had a question came in as well in relation to slurry enhancers as to whether they're worth using.
Okay, I suppose, look, there's a lot to talk about slurry enhancers. There's trial work going on at the moment in Johnstown Castle on a range of different slurry enhancer products. It's early days yet. The ones that seem to be working seem to be kind of acid-based type enhancers. So, look, as I said, it's early days. Look, anyone that's using enhancers, they probably see they're easier to agitate. Okay, that's probably the main thing that we see from enhancers at the minute, from a science point of view, in terms of NPs and Ks being available and more available and all that and usable. It's early days, and we have to wait on trial work, but it's being done in Johnstown Castle.
Okay, we'll take some more questions at the end, so we'll just pass on to Shane McCarthy and Stephen Fitzgerald. So Stephen is part of the Signpost programme, where he's putting in action ways of reducing nitrogen right through the year, and specifically this year in the spring, and for tonight, just to talk about the spring, how he's reducing nitrogen for this spring. So Shane and Stephen.
Okay, so look, we'll just go through maybe the main aim is just to go through Stephen's plan for the spring, what he's going to do for the next 3 months. So maybe Stephen, if you just want to start off and give us just a brief rundown of your farming enterprise, of where you're at the moment.
All right. Yeah, we're farming here in Teagasc, dairy beef farm, milk platform around 68, nearly 70 hectares. Farm, the lowest point of farm is around 600 feet, rising up to about just over 800 feet. Last year we milked 160 cows. That's going to increase slightly this year. Sold what we sell, just over 525 kilos of milk solids, kind of grass based as much as possible, feeding 800 kilos of meal to the cows. Average stocking rate generally around 2.2, 2.3, so it's a relatively low enough stocked farm for what we have. And I think we grew just under 14 tonne of grass as well last year. So that's kind of roughly where we are at the moment.
And maybe if you could just comment, like it's gone off the point a small bit, but just comment on the clover. You used a lot of clover there in the last couple of years.
Yeah, we always had clover in the farm, but more so in the last few years, we were including it in all the grass seed mixes, and we're trying to encourage it as much as we can. So we're last year cut back fertilizer on all the paddocks that I thought had enough clover in it to contribute in. So probably 50% of the platform here has enough clover, and a lot of the beef ground has a lot of clover. So we cut back to kind of 15 units for a lot of summer last year, and that helped reduce our in for last year. So we've reduced our in, we've spread with the last 3 years, and we're still growing the grass, but it's just having the confidence to do it and encouraging the clover to grow. And we also set a small bit of mixed species just as a trial for ourselves. So that's kind of what we're trying to do at the moment, reduce in and grow grass at the same time.
Yeah, very good. So this is just a snapshot of where Stephen's fertility is. So these soil samples were actually taken in 2020. So if you look at the pie chart there, a lot of you will be familiar with these pie charts if you're in derogation, and they're found on page 2 of the derogation plan. But on the left-hand side there, you can see Stephen's fertility there. So in terms of being up to standard for both pH, P and K, just 20% of Stephen's soils, just over 20% of Stephen's soils, okay, for both PK and lime. And I suppose there's a bit of work to be done on just under 80% of them. So Stephen, you put in a lot of work, I suppose, in the last couple of years. Again, just these were taking the start of 2020. So in the last 2 years, you've done a bit of work to improve these.
Yeah, so over half the farm has got lime in the last 2 years. Just under 400 tonne of lime we spread in the last 2 years. A lot of the platform is index 3 for P and K and OK for lime. A lot of the cattle ground in the outside box that are under pressure for soil fertility. Also, we spread all the fertilizer we spread last year and the year before is protected urea, but last year we included a lot of protected urea with K in it, 38, not, I think it's 13 or whatever. So we soil sampled a couple of weeks ago. We're waiting back for the results. So I'd expect it to be closer to 45 or 50% of optimum soils across the whole farm after this round of soil sampling. So we're waiting and seeing, and then we'll spread lime. The plan, lime-wise, is to spread again this year and every year, and spread little and often, I suppose, like lads were saying earlier, with lime. And fertilizer for this year then will be all urea, protected urea, and a small bit of compound if we have to on silage ground and things like that.
Okay, so that's where we are kind of nationally. Actually, we're in around the 20%, where it's satisfactory both for all PK and lime. So there is a bit of work nationally as well to improve soil fertility. So this is just an example of the pH maps that would have come with the derogation plan. So the darker green is the higher pH, be up over kind of 6.5, and then when you go down into the lighter colors, the kind of grays and the pale colors there, this is the kind of the more hungry fields that need attention in terms of lime. So again, Stephen, you mentioned there you spread about 400 ton in the last 2 years. What's the plan going forward then? Or
the same, all the blue areas and light green areas, they've all been spread in the last 2 years. They got 2.5 ton to the acre, and wait and see what results come back now again. And if they need more, they'll get more, but they weren't drastically low, if you know what I mean. So that's the lime plan for all those areas, and just keep spreading it as such. And rather than having to spread these 200 tons a year, it'll be easier to do it as we're receding or as places are getting low, and just keep tipping over it. We always did, but as we're growing more grass, there's obviously more demand, and we have to just keep a close eye to it by doing more soil samples.
So just a rough figure there, like if you increase your soil pH from 5.5 up to 6.3, there's potential to grow an extra ton of grass per hectare, like, which is significant. So again, like, it's probably the cheapest fertilizer you'll put out, and there's a huge, I suppose, bang for your buck in terms of the response you get from it. So these are your P and K maps. Again, the darker green would be in the index 4s, the lighter green is index 3, and then when you're down to the pale, the kind of grays, index 2s, and the pale color there is index 1s. So again, Stephen, what's the plan? I suppose, like the last couple of years you've been working on this, trying to increase your soil fertility.
Yeah, we try not to spread any compounds just because the cost of it last while and things like that. But I'd say every acre of the farm has got, especially in the platform, has got either slurry or dirty water once or twice during the year. And that's how we seem to, like, we're good for P, and we want to try and keep it like that. So we're always going to try and keep slurry out and watch where we're taking bales and things like that. And K, then we hope to have increased it, and we'll use the Sustain K, I think, or one of those products to encourage the K and the lower paddocks and things like that. But mainly through slurry and things like that, and watching where we spread it and what we spread and things like that, and make sure we're spreading the right stuff in the right place.
Okay, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see when the new soils come back, just the comparison, or how far you've gone, like, you know.
Yeah.
So just these are your maps, your P and K maps. Could you just maybe indicate how you make best use of these? Do you know, they're kind of a visual map. It's very easy to follow, like they're very useful, but how do you make best use of them?
Yeah, just going off the soil sample reports or things like that, it's not hard to see or whatever, but these are laminated and we keep them below in the office and the dairy, and once they're there in front of you, you're constantly reminded of what you need to be doing, and where you're not constantly taking bales off the same place and things like that, and where you're going with your lime and your P and K and your slurry, and like, it's just for ourselves and things like that, like, and just keeps in the back of our mind, and every time you go in there you nearly see them, and it's just a constant reminder what we should be doing and where we should be going with whatever we have.
Okay, very good. So they're probably made available to other people on the farm as well, like maybe staff or...
Yeah, they're there for anyone who goes into the office, you see them, and you can straight away, you know what they're for, and they're clearly labelled, and we know there's a farm map there as well, and you can just see what's where, and you know, and we know ourselves that we don't have to show them to contractors or anything like that, because we show them where they're going to spread in the slurry and things like that, and you know.
Very good. So maybe you might just give us an indication. What's your plan maybe for the next 3 months now in terms of slurry use? What's the plan?
Traditionally, we'd be getting geared up to spread slurry as soon as it's open, empty out as much slurry as we can before the cows start calving, and just have a job done. So this year we're going to steady ourselves a small bit, wait closer to the end of the month if we can. And then target paddocks. We're not going to empty tanks, I'd say. We'll probably bring them down to halfway. Definitely bring us to the 1st of March. So we're not going to spread as much early, and we're going to use the umbilical and dribble bar for the first round. And then I'd say we'll probably spread 30% of the farm in late January, early February. And then slurry wise, what we graze in February, we'll get slurry probably towards the end of February, another lot of slurry, and any lower paddocks as well, that'll be piped out as well. That's the slurry part of it. And then most of the farm then probably get half a bag of urea probably towards after the 10th of February, generally same as the slurry. We'd kind of a job at the end of January before the cows start calf, and you'd be gearing up and trying to cover as much ground as you can with urea. But we're going to scale back to half a bag and wait till the 10th or so, weather permitting, see how the weather's going, and keep an eye on soil temperatures. And you know, because the farm is fairly exposed, it's slower to get going, so we're going to wait till the soil temperatures are suitable. And there's also a place on top of the farm, there's 40 acres there. It's blacker soil, it's fairly exposed, so like I'm not going to spread on that. I'd say the 1st of March, and mix and match. Then try to get up to 6 units between slurry and fertilizer. But we have a cover done, and we have enough grass on the farm, and we're not heavily stocked, so we're not bursting to get a heap of fertilizer out early. So we'll just constantly watch the grass, watch the weather, and play it by ears to say.
So you're in a good position in terms of there's no mad panic for you to get out and spread the slurry. You're going to delay it as long as you can. Spread, just get enough out of the tanks to kind of keep you going. And I suppose you're going to replace some of the chemical N then with the slurry. So it's going to get 60 units in total with either slurry or chemical N, or else all chemical N if you can't get slurry to some paddocks. I suppose just on your right hand side there, there's just a good tool there as well. It's a calibration tool just for spreading your slurry. So like you put in the figures there, there's an app there, you put in the figures just on the tank size, you put in what size your tank is, you put in the working width, so the spread width of the tank, calculate how long it takes to empty the tank, and you put in your target application rate then, and then that'll give you a kind of what forward speed you should be going. Just a good indication, like to you know what's going out, say per acre in terms of gallons. And just going back to Owen's slides there as well, if you had the slurry analysed, you'd know how many units or what rate to go at in terms of what paddocks need what. So just in terms of the chemical N, you kind of touched on this already. So you're going to use protected urea if available, and reduce chemical N usage, full allowance for the slurry N. So you're going to replace as much chemical as you can with the slurry and give it 60 units. So in terms of reseeding, are you going to reseed this year? Are you going to hold off for?
No, we still need to grow the grass. So the plan is to reseed as we had planned, and just try and encourage clover and things like that, same as we done last year, and just be small but smarter with our fertilizer and things like that. And like we have tested the slurry last year, and we'll do the same again this year, so we'll know how we're spreading slurry wise and fertilizer wise, and just keep track of it and things like that. But reseeding and things like that, and yeah, everything the same as we were.
And you just touched on the last point there as well. You're conscious of areas of paddocks where fertilizer would be wasted, so you're picking and choosing where to go. And if you need to delay some of the colder paddocks, you are going to push them back a week or two if needs be. Yeah,
definitely. We used to always spread into January the whole farm or whatever, but there's definitely a place on top where we're going to delay spreading that, and everywhere else, any place there's depends on the cover and things like that, and where slurry's gone out. And yeah, we're just going to stagger things more than just going blankets with slurry or blanket with fertilizer. Just going to stagger things better.
So just to summarize, so I suppose Stephen, he has a plan. He's waiting on soil results to come back, and he's going to make good use of them. He's got his slurry analysed in 2021. He's going to get the same done again this year. He's using his colour-coded maps to very good effect. He's constantly referring back to them and seeing which paddocks needs what. He calibrates his fertilizer spreader as well, so he's gone out with the correct rates. So he'd do it at the start of the year, especially. He'd calibrate depending on different types of fertilizer that he's using. He allows for the slurry then and reduces the N. So whereas before he mentioned he would have went out with 70 units, you know, regardless of what fields got slurry or not, they were getting 70 units of chemical N. Now he's replacing the chemical N, and his target is 60 units by the 1st of April. And he's going to keep monitoring then his grass growth and average farm covers. So again, he's using all the tools he can to try and make the best informed decisions he can in terms of where he can save money and grow as much grass as he can. So just go back to maybe Austin's point again, it's just using the right product at the right rate and at the right place. So I'll hand you back to Richie again.
Okay, I'll bring back all the speakers there for questions. Just a few more minutes and we'll wrap it up with just a few more questions. One question comes through there, Stephen, is on, like, you're growing 14 tons of, nearly 14 tons of grass, which is a good bit of grass, and I think there's a per hectare, and it's 190 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. Are you presuming that your soil fertility has improved a lot in the last 2 years, given the level of grass you're growing?
Yeah, it has to have. The lime definitely I'd say we got an instant impact from the lime and the K and the slurry. We're using all trail through our triple bar with the last 2 years, and we're able to spread slurry at times of year when we ordinarily wouldn't have been able to spread it. So we're stretching out the slurry we have and using it more so into April, May, rather than trying to have it all out in March, such as say early April. And we're making better use of what we have and just watching where we're going with it.
Okay, and just on, you mentioned that you have cover done. I think it was 830 instead of an average farm cover. How important is the grass measuring to reducing your fertilizer?
It just lets us know what we have on the farm, and if we have to open the spreader small bit, or we can trust it, cut it back is what we want to do. So that's what we measure weekly. I've covered done last Saturday. I'm going to do another one in 2 weeks' time, and then probably closer first week of February, and just see how we're going. And if needs be, we can up it or we can cut it back. And you know, it's easy to monitor the situation when we're measuring the grass. Okay.
There's one question that's come through on sulfur. So we know that sulfur has a big impact on grass growth. When is the earliest you should go with sulfur, Owen or Austin?
Yeah, sulfur. Look, I think it should go out with the P and K there in the March time. You know, kind of starting from March, late March onwards, and putting out somewhere between 15 and 20 units for the grazing season. You know, I think sometime around the same time there, late March onwards.
Yeah, and somebody just made a point that, you know, spreading lime now. I think Austin, you said we can spread lime now. You can spread it little and often, but how long does it take for lime to work to get that impact? You're muted, Austin.
Sorry, just unmute there, lads. Yeah, look, the lime actually has probably the sieves that they've the lime going through has got finer over the last number of years. So really, in the first 3 months, they reckon about 25% of it has started working already, because it's at a fine particle size, and it can start working in the ground. And the particles then vary in sizes according to the mill you're getting them from. But primarily, I suppose what they're looking at is that really it takes a full year before you get the full benefit of lime being spread. But about 25 to 30% of it can be seen acting and working and helping reduce the acidity and increasing the pH in the first 3 months.
Okay, Ruth, have you any questions there?
Another one I just throw it at Austin while he's there. Any issues with spreading of lime and freshly calved cows?
No major. Look, I suppose it would have been done in the past. I suppose you'd have been dusting pastures. So look, there's no major dose unless they come across a huge cluster of it. But primarily, there's no major issue in relation to freshly calved cows.
Okay.
And just maybe as well too, just in relation to lime and urea, there's a question in relation to that for those that would have a lot of lime spread at the back end of last year, for those that were in derogation, and any issues when we're talking about urea then going in the early spring.
Yeah, so I suppose it's apply the urea first and then the lime. That's primarily because urea, I suppose it's similar to cattle slurry, where you'll get an ammonium loss or volatilization if the lime is spread first and then the urea on top of it. So a key area around that is spread your urea first and then your lime 7 to 10 days after, and that's absolutely fine. And it works the same with slurry. Spread your slurry first and then your lime after. So with any application, always leave your lime to last.
Okay, I think there's one here for Liam. We normally use 38% nitrogen, 7% sulfur. This is uncompetitive at the moment. Any suggestions for a more cost-effective source of sulfur?
And the simple answer, Richie, is not really. I presume that's the protected urea 38 and 7. It's actually thrown at us year after year, even when sulfic N is €250 a ton and urea is €300 a ton. It's thrown at us every year. It's always actually uncompetitive. It's the aim-to-waste ratio. The only alternatives are to go out with a blast of sulfur in one go, and I'd be like Owen's advice: little and often. Start early, go little and often. The days of spreading it all in one go, they're over, because it's a trace element lockup job. There's not really anything other than, I see it's Shane that has it, there's not really anything other than what's there, Shane. And plus what we're finding is sulfur is becoming more scarce at the moment. It's a byproduct of industry. The lack of industry is actually creating a tightness in sulfur products. There's no huge alternatives there.
Okay. Ruth, any other questions?
Just to follow up on the lime for us and as well, Toon. How soon after spreading lime this time of year can slurry then be applied? I know often you said if you went out, you should ideally go with the others first, but if the lime has gone out, how soon after that can we go with our slurry?
Yeah, you've a huge wasting of nitrogen, and the recommendation is 3 months between if the lime has gone out first and then slurry afterwards. So lime is always the last one we'd recommend going out. If it's the other way around, avoid it if at all possible.
Okay, and K in the spring of the year, what's the max amount of K in the spring of the year not to have any effects?
Yeah, Richie, I suppose look from a grass technique point of view, you're looking at somewhere between 60 and 70 units of K is the maximum, on a grazing scenario of putting out K, probably up to 70 units. First cut silages, you can top it up to 100 units of K. But from a grazing point of view, you start going over the 70 units, you run that risk there, especially in the second rotation grass.
Okay, and the area for size, is it too late to do take a size sample, and what area should I take? What's the maximum area should I take, Austin?
I suppose the derogation rules are 5 hectares, but we'd be encouraging a 4 hectare sample to get a good representative sample. So you're looking at the kind of 10 acres for one sample, around €15 in the local labs, and at the minute a 10 to 12 day turnaround.
Okay, and I just revert back to Stephen for the final question. Like long term, I know this spring you're reducing your nitrogen. Long term, what's your target for grass growth and stocking rate, and your target for nitrogen? Big question for you, Stephen.
Yeah, target stocking rate for platform would be probably 2.4, 2.5 cows per hectare, grown close to 15 ton if we can. That last ton is going to be hard to get. And nitrogen then is going to be around 190, I'd say around 150, 160 or 70 units per hectare. If we increase the growth and stocking rate, we're going to have to increase slightly. But I don't want to go mad. I want to hold it close to where we are by using clover and multi-species and things like that. I'll try a lot of things before I'll increase nitrogen.
Okay, perfect. Ruth, I'm finished my questions. Unless you have any others.
Yeah, no, we're all good. We're all good.
Okay, listen, we'll leave it at that because we're gone slightly over the hour. I'd really like to thank all the speakers, Liam Dunphy from Gouldings, our own colleagues in Teagasc, and a big thanks to Stephen Fitzgerald as part of the Signpost programme. He's taken on a big project for the next 5 years in reducing nitrogen and using different technologies in reducing the carbon footprint for the farm, and nitrogen being one of those big reductions that will help his carbon footprint. So thanks to everybody for coming on, bringing the questions on. I know you're coming into a busy time of the year, so I presume you're all getting ready for that. So in the meantime, stay safe, and thanks to everybody for coming on board. Okay, thank you.